Guarantee. How are we this morning?
Oh,
We are
good to see
good.
you.
Doing very well.
So wonderful to see you guys. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Tell me, how do you feel post recording of Infinite Yes? How are you feeling right now in this present moment?
I feel free. I mean, I feel like we've released, even though it hasn't, quite come out yet. We have released a beautiful animal that's wanted to run free, and so now we've polished it up, and it's lovely. How
That's
about you guys?
I would echo that. I also feel free. It's been working on it for 19 months, so it feels very good to be, send it out to the world, and everything from here on out is automated,
yeah, absolutely. Julian, how about you, my friend?
I'm feeling good. It's nice to have that collaborative experience. I am looking back on the times we had, and just kind of laying around on Dustin's studio floor and laying down guitar tracks and kind of meticulously writing guitar parts and stuff like that. And yeah, it feels good. I didn't do quite as much as these boys did, but I wasn't digging in. I was just kind of showing up and playing. So
Yeah. From what I've heard, this all around, this seemed like such a unique process with such a unique dynamic. You guys have been doing music together for all of your lives. Can you tell me a little bit about that dynamic from when you were growing up versus how it is now in your adult age?
Well, for me, I mean, I'm the youngest of the three of us, and I started my initial drive to even start learning music, learning piano, was watching Julian over here take piano lessons. When I was 3 years old, he was 7, and the piano teacher wouldn't take me at 3 years old. I had to wait till I was 4. But I mean, from the very beginning, my musical journey has been heavily influenced by these two, and our family in general. I mean, Dad's dad, my grandfather, was also a musician, and he played cello. So I mean, it's been all the way down, right? It's just been heavily musically influenced by each other,
Brilliant.
yeah, same for me. It's I was just telling one of my guitar students, like, looking back, I listened to Dad's influences sometimes, a la Eric Clapton and the like, and I'm like, oh, I do that. That's something I probably heard Dad do 25 years ago on the guitar, and now I do that. Some kind of subconsciously, growing up, we took piano and stuff like that, and played various other instruments, and kind of settled into our own instruments. Really, it's guitar for me, and it's keys for Dustin, and learning, kind of taking our own paths with that, and then having some formal education around our instruments and theory, and production as well.
Cool.
And all kind of flowed together to allow us to create music like we're doing.
Yeah. And in our house, Ceili, it's both my parents were musicians. They met in music school in 1940, and so I grew up in a 100% musical family. I had an uncle who was a concert violinist. Everybody in my family made music, and Julian and Dustin's mother, Bera, is a fine musician and dancer herself, a really remarkable pianist, and was a professional dancer when she was young. And so we considered music as not an elective in our house. Our sons had no choice about whether to study music. The only choice they had was what instrument. They could play any instrument they want, although I definitely discouraged drums. I didn't want to live with drums, but I could tolerate any other instrument. And so it wasn't an elective in our house. So we just always played music.
Sure.
And it was not super structured, right? Which I really appreciated, because we were able to kind of pursue it on our own terms. And that's really like what, something I encourage with my own various guitar students, is like, do your thing, right? Pursue the creative process that you want to pursue. When I was in high school, if I was playing guitar, I could get out of doing the dishes after dinner. So that was a big motivator for me. It was like, hey, you don't have to do dishes if you're playing music. And so I was probably going to be playing music anyway, but that would certainly helped with the consistency night after night.
For sure. Now, Julian, you mentioned formal education. Both Dustin and Julian, did you guys both go to formal education for your instruments?
Yeah, we went to Shenandoah University, and spent a few years there.
Yeah, we both went for music production and recording technology, and I think one of the reasons we chose Shenandoah is because the focus. This isn't a common thing among recording programs in schools, but in a lot of schools, it's just an engineering degree. You don't need to know anything about music at many in many production programs. So one of the great things about Shenandoah University is that you had to choose a major instrument and a minor instrument. That was a part of your degree. And we had to take all the regular music classes that all the rest of the musicians took, which is one of the main reasons I chose to go there.
Yeah. Tell me about the structure of a higher education versus the structure that you had at home. Were there any similarities? Were there differences? Was something a bit more difficult in either environment? Were there things that were easy in either environment?
That's a really good.
Well, at home before college, before higher education, it was study, right? I really struggled with practice. I really had to frame it in my head as play to really get it done before college. But once we went into college, it was very much like we had 16 to 18 credits we had to do every semester, and we had many 1 credit, half credit classes. We even had things that were 0 credits. So our schedules were absolutely filled with music. It was a lot more pressure for sure. A lot more pressure. We had to do these things called juries, which were essentially at the end of every semester, we'd get in front of the heads of our instruments department and have to perform 2 or 3 pieces that we had been working on all semester. And it was more stressful than any musical endeavor I had ever done, just playing in front of these amazing professors.
For sure.
And I think for both Dustin and myself, we were frankly a little bit more focused on the social aspect of college life than we were on the homework aspect. And and in Shenandoah, I don't know if this is a surprise to you, Dad.
I'm shocked and appalled.
But the cool thing about living in Winchester, it's not the most exciting town, but there really is no competition. So we threw being in a band. And so, whereas in Richmond, we have to be like, please, can we open up for this artist that's coming to town? It was like all these like cool opening gigs just kind of landed in our lap. We were friends with the guy who was putting a lot of shows together at a couple of venues around town. So we had a lot of early experience, maybe not putting so much work into the juries and into the school side of things, but we had a great, it was a really cool way to apply the stuff we were learning in school to kind of a more practical kind of like live music, kind of funky, jammy, rock and roll kind of setting, outside of, I don't think either of us really had aspirations to be in like a big band, as much as we might play jazz around town or whatever. That wasn't particularly at that point what was calling us. So we were able to kind of apply those concepts in a real world setting, kind of in real time.
Yeah. It's like you guys were actually a part of your music community or something.
Mm-hmm.
Actually being a part of why you create music in the first place, by like connecting with people and connecting what you do.
That's one of the things, I think, biggest things I learned at SU was how important that is. Was because the school was filled to the brim with some of the best musicians I've ever known. And a lot of them were the type of musician to lock themselves in their practice room and practice for hours and hours and hours, just something I wasn't very good at. But a lot of these people never learned the social side of the music world, and thus didn't break in. So there's a lot of musicians that I know from college who are way better than me, who never learned how to meet people and actually get their name out there, and who I see working less as musicians just because they haven't met the people.
Yeah. Ronen, tell me about your perspective of watching your sons grow up to be the musicians that they are. Like prior to, like, of course, approaching them with this, again, beast of a project. How did you know that, like, they were, quote unquote, ready to, for all of you guys to pursue this creative journey together?
Well, of course, when they were growing up, we made music together from time to time. And more recently, we've recorded together. In fact, as recently as a decade ago, when I was still living up in New York, we had a couple of occasions, both at my home in Livingston Manor and at a recording studio in Brooklyn. We've recorded, I think, 2, maybe 3 tracks together, and didn't put it on the major platforms. There's a little obscure album on Bandcamp that about 12 people have listened to. And so we had experience with that, and that was just heavenly. And we were all we were different musicians then. We were younger, even me, I was a younger musician then, and not clear on what we wanted and what we were doing. In fact, one occasion in Brooklyn was inspired by a John Mayer video of him just calling a couple of friends into a studio and without a song and saying, let's make a song today. And so we ran that experiment once and created a fun little dancey tune. But then over the years, I would go see their Sana Lumini performances. And then when they became Bebas, I've gone to a couple of Bebas performances in Richmond and Virginia Beach, and have just been so delighted by their growth as musicians and as performers. And then I moved east. I had been living, I went from New York to Tucson, and then I moved to North Carolina. So I'm just 2.5 hours away. And so I got to thinking, and then Dustin's got this beautiful studio, and I've got a less beautiful studio, but I still got some toys. And it occurred to me, well, let's make some music together. We can do this now in a more serious way. We never felt that the earlier 2 or 3 efforts were release worthy, which is why you can't find them on Spotify or Apple. But I thought, boy, it's time. It's time, and we're all ready as musicians, and we're ready as neighbors, really. So that's when I knew we were ready to get serious and make some music together.
Cool. Dustin and Julian, do you agree with the sentiment that the first 2 projects are not listen worthy? Do you agree with your dad's sentiment?
They're not as fine tuned. They're like early rumblings of what could be. I think it's not amazing. I think anything is listen worthy. It's but I don't know if I want to put that up on Spotify. I don't know if it's necessarily representative of our capacity as musicians.
To that point, I mean, I would say, I mean, maybe it's listen worthy, not necessarily as this is an expansive music project that I'm interested in, but like I'll go back sometimes and listen to like some of mine and Julian's releases from 10 years ago. And they're not something I would like send around to be like, this is what I'm capable of. But I was just listening back to our tune Ambit that we released 2017, I think, the other day.
Listening to that the other night too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and it's again not something that really represents us at all, but it was a very fun listen, I think, for us, right, to go back, but not necessarily for, and not everyone will have the same connection to it that like the creators might.
You know,
Yeah.
Kaylee, one way to think about it is that Stephen Stills has an album that he released years after they were famous, called Just Roll Tape.
Yeah.
And he just went into a studio and you could hear him experimenting. Or Prince has an album called Piano and a Microphone, and you can hear seeds of ideas unfold in real time. The main difference, besides the production quality, is that those 2 or 3 songs, I think it's 2 songs, were literally invented while we were making the music. And that's not the case with this with the Infinite Yes album. The Infinite Yes album is 6 songs that we composed very deliberately and thoughtfully, and and we improvised ideas along the way. And within the songs, there's improvisation, but they're conceived and executed songs, and that's the first time that the 3 of us have done that together.
Yeah. That, and it's a feat of 6 songs. These are long through compositions that not a lot of albums being put out right now are producing. You guys really sat down and intentionally thought out what you guys were going to say. Tell me about the intention behind this.
I think one of the things for me is I really struggle to write a short song. I really, Julian and I'll tell you, with our, we're working on getting better at this, but over the years we've written more 6 to 10 minute songs than we've written 3 to 5 minute songs. I always kind of struggle to really fully get my idea out there with a short idea. I feel like a theme takes time to develop to its fullest capacity. I think our shortest song on the album is what 4 or 5 minutes on this album. We have an 11-minute song on the album that we really took our time on, and it's just for full exposure of ideas. We really liked the ideas we came up with, and we really wanted to give them their full birth, right? Their full width, as it were, for me at least.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity for everybody to kind of take a solo and really like build the energy up, right? I think you're talking about Distant Land, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that was an opportunity for all 3 of us to actually, it starts off kind of, start a solo, low energy, and really build it until it's really big. And all 3 of us do that. And so that's like, several minutes right there.
As I was recording, as Julian on and Dad on specifically this song, the phrase was "slow down, take your time,
and then we can pick it up later, and we can really like rip and kind of show off a little bit as we kind of get to the big build in the composition.
Yeah.
I haven't the foggiest notion how the Beatles composed so many great 2.5-minute songs. It's inconceivable to me. The first 4 or 5 albums is just a whole bunch of really great 2.5, 3-minute songs, and I have no idea how to write a 3-minute song. There's also a thread in all of us of jam. I mean, I think it's in our genes. We're jam musicians. We love a good extended solo, whether we're playing it or listening to it.
Yeah.
And what's curious is that none of us grew up as deadheads, but you could kind of you can definitely experience it. I'm deeply influenced by Clapton, and there's nothing for me in going to a performance, nothing better than a good long solo. Probably the peak concert listening moment of my life was an 18-minute version of Voodoo Child that Clapton and Winwood did in Philadelphia one evening. And to me, that's just heaven. Give me a good long song with some expert soloists, and I'm in.
Absolutely. What were you guys listening to outside, like while you guys were recording the album?
That's a good question. I think I mean I've always got like a lot of like progressive metal on repeat, and I think that shows up in some of the heavier stuff that we do here. Like Pliny, Animals as Leaders. Obviously we don't go quite as heavy as either of those guys.
Even remotely as heavy.
No 8-string guitars involved in this in the production of this album.
Although not for lack of wanting. I know you want one, Julian.
Yeah, it just wasn't in the budget, man. So I mean, we were able to kind of get a little heavier with it. But both the kind of the heavier aspects of that and the kind of the more melodic aspects of both of those guys, both Pliny and Tos Nabasi, and definitely are going to make Inowane. They're always going to make their way into my playing and my composition. The gentle parts and the heavier, more aggressive parts. I think we all are, at least Dustin and I are really on, very much on board with the Lewis Cole train.
I was gonna say, Lewis Cole just released Nothing this year, 2024. That was a heavy influence for me while working on this album. The orchestral kind of side of the album, or of his album, working with the Metropole Orchestra must be incredible.
Yeah.
And I think it's a shame he wasn't nominated for Album of the Year for that thing. It was incredible. I've been listening to that all year. And we all are big on Jacob Collier as well. We love Jacob. The variety aspect, I think that was one of the things we leaned into with this album. Jacob's very good at going from this genre to that genre to really like playing the full gambit. And I think that's something we wanted to lean into on this album because we have a variety of musical influences. And I don't think there's one song on this album that's influenced from the same place as another.
Yeah. No, not.
For me, the specific influences for this album, certainly Jacob Collier. I remember I was driving across the country, hauling some furniture back from Tucson as a part of this move, and thinking a lot about one of the songs on the album, Requiem. And I was listening to, speaking of Grammy nominations for Album of the Year, I was listening to Jesse 4, Jacob Collier's Grammy-nominated album from last year. And I remember calling up Dustin and saying, all right, that piano thing we were doing, let's orchestrate it. It's on you. And so then Dustin creates this incredible symphonic introduction that was also around the time of, I had just seen the movie Maestro about Leonard Bernstein. And Dustin's introduction on Requiem just made me think of, oh my God, this is Bernstein-esque and cinematic. And everybody I've played Requiem for has said this could be in a film. So Jacob Collier, for me, No Distant Land was inspired by a very old name in rock and roll. People my age will know this name, and people younger than me will not. And that's Robin Trower, who was sometimes talked about as the White Hendrix. And he had a particular song that I was listening to on a camping trip here in North Carolina. And I was thinking, God, I'd love to have a good, long, slow, dark song like Bridge of Sighs. And so coming back from the camping trip, I remember picking up the phone and calling Julian. And of course, both boys are familiar with this song because it was played around the house when they were growing up. And there are other versions that Julian knows. And I said, Julian, I think we need to do something with this coloration. And I said, and you're so much better guitarist than I am. Can you come up with an iconic bottom, like the guitar part that everything rests on for us. And then he came up with, I don't know, a handful of ideas, and we batted them back and forth. And when he and I were happy about that kind of tone around it, then we, as we always do, we turn to Dustin and say, all right, make a song, Dustin. That's kind of how the way the whole album is. Like, we come up with a couple of ideas, Julian and or I come up with a couple of ideas, and then we say, all right, make a song. And Dustin makes a song out of it.
That's funny. About the Bridge of Sighs things. I forgot that's where that came from, but that totally makes sense, because the project file in Ableton is called Bridge. If we go back to the original for that song specifically, it's called Bridge, even though No Distant Land is the actual song name. If I'm trying to find it, I have to like think and remember, like, Bridge. Yes, that's the Bridge of Sighs, Bridge. But yes, it was that was a really fun one to break into too, because I love like the riff that you guys kind of came to me with that was really fun to build on top of. And when I was leaning into it, I was actually thinking a little bit more modern. I was thinking a little bit more the main squeeze. It feels very much like a heavy the main squeeze tune.
The B riff is definitely squeeze influenced.
For sure.
I think the A riff is I'm really trying to capture the energy of Bridge of Sighs, and then I'm thinking that kind of was very like Trouble, and or I'll take another kind of like that kind of pentatonic-y kind of heavy slow kind of sound. I was definitely trying to capture that as well, and kind of keep in with that like kind of slow, but like kind of pick up the energy a little bit.
And then one other influence that is distinctly on the album, I remember listening to Jacob Collier and, oh golly, guys, help me with the singer, Jacob Collier and John Mayer and
I know who you're talking about.
Lizzie McAlpine?
Yeah, Lizzie.
Never Gonna
exactly.
Be Alone.
I was listening to that gorgeous piece of music, and I was watching it on repeat. And also, I was listening a lot to John Mayer's ballad version of Last Train Home. And I remember coming to the guys, we were thinking we needed another song. 5 songs wasn't enough for us for an album. And we had a couple of ideas that are still on the cutting room floor that are partially recorded and never completed. And I remember thinking, what we really need is a ballad. We don't have a ballad. And so Love Will Take Us Home comes out of that inspiration of both the ballad version of Last Train Home and then the Lizzie McAlpine Mayer Collier collaboration.
All of these songs are heavy, both in emotional context and in production context. What was harder for you? Was it the musical content, or was it the emotional and lyrical content?
For me, it depended on the song. Requiem.
I'm laughing, Dustin, because I'm thinking about the 2 songs in particular that just about broke your brain and computer from the production difficulty.
Well, yeah, technological limits aside, for the musical content was the emotional content kind of naturally happened, at least on my end. It kind of naturally came from the music we were writing. I don't know. For me, the emotion was like, we conceptualized No Distant Land before we even had any like lyrics written. We had the basic idea for the song Dad came with, and from that the music spawned. Right, the emotional side felt a little easier to me, or it felt natural. It just came from the music. So I don't. At least on my end of things, it didn't feel the emotion was always there. It was getting the music to really prop up the emotion we were trying to convey. Was I think the harder part, at least on my end.
Yeah, the lyrical side of things was totally Dad, and the process was, for each, various pieces of music some of them started more with kind of the lyrical idea, And then we tried to capture what's going on with the lyrics in the music, and then vice versa for some of the other songs where the basis was the composition, right? Some of these pieces were already fully composed by Dustin, and then, he brought it to the table and said, Dad, here's something you can write lyrics over, right? So it's a little bit of both, I would say. I think the creative process kind of went both ways in that.
I
It really depends on
struggle.
the tune.
I struggle with writing lyrics for songs. I've already I've already got a different idea about album number 2, about my approach to lyrics that was inspired by Joni Mitchell in an interview when she said she described her music as finding a way, finding music to wrap around her poetry. And for me, that sounds easier than what this album was. Because this album, the music invariably came first. And then I was kind of writing lyrics to fit the music. And that's difficult for me. I write poetry a lot. I've got dozens of poems that are now candidates for, music. Now that I've heard Joni's take on it. And of course, it's not the first time I thought of this. I grew up with Dylan and Simon and Mitchell. So I grew up with poets making music. So yeah, everything else was easy, particularly because I get to lean on these two guys. As much as I come up with this really primitive idea. I go, hey, I got these 5 chords that I like the way they sound together. Dustin and Julian, let's do something with this.
Well, that was a really fun thing for me with Love Will Take Us Home, because the way this went, Dad sent me an iPhone recording of him playing a simple concept on the piano, and he said make it good, and that was actually a really, really fun section for me. It was the verse and the chorus of Love Will Take Us Home. And that was actually a really, really fun project for me because I needed to find a way to connect those two, which is how I wrote the pre-chorus. I don't know. I that was really fun for me. Was kind of creating that emotion. We needed a ballad. This is the ballad we were talking about. It was just started with a simple piano recording, and getting to bring in the strings and build up that pre-chorus and just cycle through these 3 sections was a really, really fun experience for me.
Yeah. Tell me more about your production experience with this project, because there are so many instruments on the album that are just you and other sounds, correct?
A lot of what goes on to this album is in the box. Something I've been trying to, for the first thing, this has been a big learning experience for me because I do have a perfectionist streak. I don't know if anyone here has watched Arcane. There's a quote from the show, without doing any spoilers, that has really been sticking with me recently. It's there is no prize to perfection, only an end to pursuit. And so that's been the big learning for me through this album. I've been especially trying to get this album finished. I was repeating that quote over and over in my head, because it's very true. But on the other side of it, there's always more to add, right? Requiem was the most involved, I think, instrumentally. I had this full symphony orchestra idea for the intro, and then I wanted to bring that in and out of the piece. That
was pretty involved for all of us, I think. And just to kind of talk a little bit more on that, if you don't mind my interruption.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was initially an idea that Dad had been sitting on for 30 years or more.
Yeah. I improvised the basic structure of Requiem. I was visiting some friends in Wilmington, and the woman in this couple, her mother had just died, and I just sat down at their piano. We were all 3 grieving, and so I just sat down and wrote this thing, and then I liked it so much I played it a lot every time I sat down at the piano. So the boys grew up listening to this.
Yeah.
And then I re-recorded it and turned it over to Dustin, and kind of like what I did with Julian on No Distant Land. I said, "You're a much better keyboardist than I am." This is again me leaning on my sons for their talent and training and skill. Because, Dustin, you're the keyboardist in the family. Do something with this. And so then the production comes out of that. I actually don't play on that song. I wrote it, but I'm not on it. It's fine with me.
it was particularly involved. I mean, I'm really happy with that guitar solo because we took a really long time. Dustin and I took like an entire afternoon tracking this guitar solo, like bit by bit, like, so it had a nice build, and we really liked every phrase, and we kind of put it together like that. Sorry to give away the secrets, but that was not one take. I
No. Oh, no. That was
it was
very
takes.
intentionally crafted. Very intentionally crafted.
And we slowly but surely took a few solos and really cleaned, picked out the parts we liked and cleaned it up, and like bit by bit, took it 1 or 2 bars at a time. And kind of put it together that way, and it turned out sounding amazing.
Dustin for his part is doing this one instrument at a time.
Yeah.
On the symphony.
Yeah.
This is not Dustin on a keyboard playing all the instruments at once. No, it's like one instrument at a time making a symphony orchestra.
Oh, and I will say there was a lot of influence from Dad, specifically on Requiem. He said, I want this to sound more, I don't know, what was the word you used? Morose, tragic. We need French horn here, right? Or we need. There was a bunch of instrument requests.
Timpani. I remember saying, we also need timpani here, right?
Timpani at the end, like at the outro. There's a lot of influence on like where the orchestration would go. From Dad on this one. How can we make this get the emotional content? He told me the story. Actually, I don't think I knew the story on how Requiem, or the original piano part for Requiem, was written until we started working on this tune. So I didn't really know like the backstory about your friend's mom. And I think going into it was very much that helped me build the orchestration into that.
And behind all of it, on that song in particular, all three of us have a special place in our musical hearts for Mozart's Requiem.
Sure.
It's hard to grow up in the household that I grew up in without Mozart kind of being one of the big four. And therefore, it was hard for these guys to grow up in a household without Mozart just being in the room. And of course, when they were growing up, the movie Amadeus came out. And so, of course, Requiem is the last piece in that. And so I think we're all, Ceili, you were talking about emotional content. For me, at least, as I was thinking about, we're writing Requiem here, and so whenever I thought about we're writing a Requiem, Mozart comes up for me. I can't write a Requiem without the background of Mozart's Requiem.
Mm-hmm. But we didn't want it to be just like a symphonic piece, right? We still wanted to lean into like what we like to do, right? For especially Julian and I have been very heavily influenced by groove, So we wanted to find this balance between like a sad Requiem and moving rhythms and groove. So that was really the balance we tried to strike on that tune, I think.
And if you're collaborating with these two guys, you want to take advantage of their strengths. And so,
I will say that
on Requiem, tears my heart out.
I will say the Dies Irae on Mozart's Requiem grooves pretty hard.
Yeah, that is fair. That is
like you could put a beat behind that very easily.
Julian, I want to ask you, as a guitarist, translating and supporting the messages behind each song. Tell me how that process was for you in this project versus other projects that you have to do for not your kin. Tell me about
Oh, well, most of what I do is with Dustin, and that's been the case for 12 years or so. That's kind of the primary, I think, that, Sona Lumini and now Bebas have been kind of the primary OG music projects for us. As somebody who plays around town, it's like often, I'm playing in cover bands and stuff like that, and that's not quite the same thing, right? It's like either I'm playing some simple comping part or playing in a cover band that lets me solo or whatever, but it's not original music. That's a really good question. I don't really think about the lyrics too much, right? I'm just not a lyrics guy when it comes to music. And when I'm listening to music, lyrics are kind of background noise, until I've listened to it a couple times, or unless they're like really good. So when I'm writing guitar parts for these kind of things, it's much more a response to the harmony and the groove, and saying, okay, well, what level of intensity, what kind of target notes do I want to hit? How can I kind of create a story here, independent of the lyrics, right? It's so much more about the instrumentality of it for me, and so that's really what I try to pick up on. I think there's emotion is more, for me, easily conveyed musically than verbally. I guess I could say.
To that point, and this is something I talk about with my students as well, sorry to interrupt. Is that there are no words in not many words for the English language to describe music that are or sounds in general that are just that. When we think of something as being that sounds sharp, that's a tactile experience, right? Or this feels dull. Again, that's tactile. This feels all we have is really loud and quiet. There's not many more than that are actually purely auditory words. And so there's always some depth to how we can explore melody and harmony to tell a story that will never translate it directly into words, right? I can play a chord progression, and for one student, they'll say this sounds joyous, and others it'll sound like maybe uplifting. They'll have similar stories to a chord progression, but there's a difference. Everyone interprets it slightly differently. I'll play a chord for one person in context in a chord progression, and they'll say, "Oh, this sounds domineering," and then the other person will say, "This sounds uplifting," and it's the exact same chord progression. So there's different ways we can really. It's going to feel different for everybody, right? But there's no real words that fully convey what a harmony or melody can actually tell us, right?
Yeah, to tag on to that, like I was working with a student, very interesting student that both Dustin and I work with, who we were listening to some very stripped down kind of indie rock thing, really simple major chord progression. And maybe it's my training, and I'm like, this isn't a major key, so it's happy. Even though it's like, kind of maybe sad, emo indie kind of stuff. And he was like, my student was like, this is really like more like, what was the word he looked, melancholy. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. It can be melancholy, but like the chords in my mind, and maybe again, this is my conditioning, is like the chords are happy though, and he just didn't feel that. And so there's so many elements, and we tried playing these chords a couple different ways, and he's like, see, like now you play like that, and that's too happy. Like that's not capturing the melancholic vibe of like the original song. So it really is interesting how different elements, even over the same three chords, right? Like executing those chords in a different way can really shape the emotional content of it.
Sure. That's wonderful. My friends, we're running out of time a little bit, so I want to wrap up with a couple of rapid fire. Hey, where can we hear this? Are you guys going to be playing this live? Can we see you? How can we support you in your journeys going forward? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the single's already out there. The You Are Free was released on
Lovely.
the 14th of February. That's on all the major streaming platforms. Or for some reason, we're having trouble getting it onto YouTube. It's something stuck in the process there, but it'll get there eventually. And then the album is to be released on February 28th. So the other 5 songs will, and the album as a whole, will be released on the 28th.
Amazing. Ronen, will you be coming up to be playing any of these?
We have talked about this. Julian's our man about town who's going to, if we do it, it'll because Julian has persuaded one of his contacts in the whole Richmond community that we're something to listen to. As I've thought about what would it take for us to perform this incredibly studio-focused album live, I think of poor Dustin, because it's a whole lot of work to go to be able to create a live experience that even it remotely resembles this album. But we've been talking about this for months. I would love to do a live version of this.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, hopefully we can see you guys in person, in the flesh, performing such an incredible feat of music. I am so happy to talk to you guys about the process, about your influences, about your relationships with each other, and I cannot wait to hear what's next after a well-deserved break and rest. I'm happy that this animal is free in this world. Infinite Yes on February 28th on all streaming platforms. Goddard Guarantee, Ronen, Dustin, Julian. Thank you guys so much for talking today. It was lovely to hang out.
Kaylee.
Thank you, Kaylee. You've been great.
I appreciate you.
Absolutely.